A one and a two and a chick-a-boom a chick.
All right, I've got a little different kind of ad for you today. If you've been listening to this podcast for the last 6 months or so, you've already heard me talk about one of our sponsors, Contractor Growth Network. Well, instead of trying to get you to head over to their website or give them a call, they just asked me to encourage you to go back and listen to the episode called Moving Beyond DIY Marketing that we released in June. In it, Peter Rainey from Rainey Blair Weidman shares why he trusted Contractor Growth Network and how they were able to make his website generate more referral quality leads for his design build firm. If you've been thinking about it for a while and want to get some more info on a real person's experience, go back and listen to, back in June, Moving Beyond DIY Marketing. Check out that episode. You won't regret it. All right, welcome to the Remodelers on the Rise show. I was thinking, we're nearing the 350-ish mark of our podcast. And, it's a lot of episodes. It's a lot of yipping and yapping into the microphone. And then my guest today, he was talking about his podcast. He's like, we're nearing 500. And I said, whoa. Look at this guy. The reason he has 500 and I have 350 is because this man is wiser and he has more to say. His name is Dr. Kurt Nelson. And Kurt, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me, Kyle.
Do you remember your favorite guest appearance on any podcast that you've ever done? It was back in February of this year. We were talking about employee engagement, the 4 drives that motivate your team. It was sensational, the people said.
Yeah, well, it was obviously my most favorite podcast I've ever been on. So here you go.
Okay, good. Yeah. Good. Michael Anschel, a wonderful remodeler in the Minneapolis area, knows Dr. Kurt Nelson from various things over the years and this winter camp thing and whatnot. Yeah. So Michael introduced me to Kurt. We did a great episode that got into what he specializes in. He's a behavioral psychologist, works with Fortune 100 companies and other companies, motivates, inspires certain behaviors out of our team. And I was wanting to actually go back, and I kind of read through the transcript a bit earlier today of going, those 4 drives was just very clear from a leadership standpoint. How do we engage with our team members? So I would encourage you listening, if you like today's episode, go click back in the archives back to February 7th, 2025. It's titled Employee Engagement, the 4 drives that motivate your team. And we've got more fun things to talk about today, Kurt. If you could just introduce yourself, maybe talk about kind of what you're focused on these days, yep. And then let's dive into a little bit of this behavioral science stuff.
There you go. Thank you, Kyle. So again, just to introduce myself, I'm Kurt Nelson. I have a couple different companies that I work on and with and part of, however you want to say it. One is the Lantern Group, where we do work with business to business, and we bring behavioral science principles into that. That's a lot of the stuff that we talked about with on the last time, 4 drive model, applying that into work, various different things. We have a side company called Behavior Shift, which is developing tools to help people change. So we have a number of different guided journals. We have little modules to help people do. We have video training services, various different pieces along that line. Again, helping people set really good goals, help them achieve those goals, and go through all of the different changes that are needed in order to make your dreams come true. And then lastly, as we talked about, or you were mentioning so kindly, that part of a podcast called Behavioral Grooves, we're just crossing 500 episodes, 8 years, and having a big celebration in Minneapolis in October to celebrate that. So fantastic.
Be there or be square, folks.
Exactly.
And hear me now, remember me later, listeners. If you go to behaviorshift.com.shop. Okay, I was on the shop part. Behaviorshift.shop. You click on products, and it lists out all kinds of interesting things. There's the Daily Shift Journal. There's the Decision Shift module. There's the Goal Shift module. Hear me now, remember me later. If you go ahead and email me, and say, I listened to this podcast and here was a really helpful takeaway I received. The first 3 people that do that, we will be purchasing whatever item you want. I looked real quick and made sure it wasn't like $1,000 item in here. It looks like, yeah, everything's pretty reasonable. So the first 3 people that email me that, we're going to hook you up with something from there because we like to have a little fun.
Well, that comes as a complete surprise. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that'll be
And
good.
anybody who goes out there, let me know if you want a personalized component of that. I'm happy to do that as well. So
Excellent. So we were going to talk through communication. You had mentioned even talking into a little bit of the behavioral science behind communication, some of the miscues we have. A lot of folks listening to this are either business owners of remodeling companies. They are project managers and folks that are managing team members within the remodeling company. And this idea of how do we become better leaders and how do we communicate more clearly, more effectively? I get this all the time? How do I motivate my team to all be kind of rowing and going in the same direction? I want you to kind of do some teaching, do some sharing around some of those items, and feel free to kind of dig into the behavioral science. There's all kinds of phrasings and all kinds of things that I'll be kind of taking notes on. Where would you like to start in that conversation, Kurt?
So I think I'll do a real high level overview. So we do workshops on this all the time with leaders across multiple organizations, mostly Fortune 500, but do it with all sorts of different things, helping them understand how to communicate, and even working down into the employees and helping employees communicate better. But one of the key things is we think about communication. There's science behind communication, right? And what we often look at is what we call the sender receiver model. And basically it's saying, hey, when we communicate, we are sending out information, or we think we're sending out information. But what we often forget is that there's a receiver there, right? And so the person who is receiving that information, whether it's a communication one-on-one, me sending out, talking to a group, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a video that you do, whether it's written communication, whether that be email or other things, there's always 2 parties or more in this. And one of the key things that we try to talk about is we often think, I'm communicating great. I'm sending out this fantastic communication. Of course they understand me. And that's not always the case. And it's not always the case, not because you're communicating, poorly per se, but there is this facet of noise between what's happening. And that noise can literally be physical noise. If you're thinking about communicating in a shop floor, in a restaurant, something else, there's noise. And so that's a really good metaphor to think. But that noise isn't always just the physical noise that we have. Sometimes it actually is the mental noise that's going on in our heads. What's
I
what's
don't have
distracting?
any of that. You have some
Yeah,
of that, Kurt?
never, right? We never have any of kind of distractions or different things that are going on. So it's really important for us to be
I'll let you keep going a
thinking.
second. One of my buddies, I was golfing with him a month or 2 back, and he was just kind of sitting on the green and kind of looking off into the just kind of looking. And I said, Mark, what are you thinking about right now? And what's going on in your head? And he goes, you know what's going on in my head? Just a bunch of monkeys clanging cymbals. That's all that's going on up there. That's what's going on. I don't know. There's just so many thoughts I've got. So much noise, if you will.
Exactly. And so we think about the monkeys that are clashing in our brains, right? And we know that they're going on in ours, but we often forget that they're going on in others. And so when we communicate, when we're sitting there as leaders and we're trying to get a message across or make sure people understand information that we need them to understand, or as you said earlier, inspire them, get them motivated, get them going, we have to take into account that everybody has monkeys, smashing cymbals going on. And so when you think about that, that helps a little bit. Right, it helps in understanding that. But I think there's also some really interesting pieces when we think about communication, and particularly in how we frame our communication. And so this is where some of the behavioral science comes in. And so one of my favorite components on communication is framing. And there is this really good research that shows the way that we frame how we talk about something impacts the way that we receive it and the subsequent behavior. And let me give you one thing. So there's a concept called equivalence frames. Basically, I'm
Equivalent
saying
what? Equivalence what?
equivalence frames. So I'm
Frames.
saying the same thing. I'm just saying it differently. And so, for instance, nobody ever goes to the grocery store and nobody ever sees a package of hamburger that says 20% fat, right? We see 80% lean, or 85% lean. We don't see 15% fat or 20% fat, but that's really basically saying the same thing. And the difference, like why we don't see that, is people wouldn't buy a 20% fat, package of hamburger. They're going to buy a 80% lean package of hamburger. And one of my best, one of the best studies I saw on this was they did work with doctors. So you think doctors really looking and just figuring things out. And basically what they did is they said, hey, doctors, we have this treatment. Here's this disease state. Here's a treatment. And they basically gave half of the doctors that said, there's a 90% success rate with this treatment. And the other doctors, we said, same exact thing, except for just worded it and said, there's a 10% failure rate with this treatment. So if you look at those, they're exactly the same. And you would think doctors are smart people, they should figure that out. But no, when you looked and said, which treatment are you going to offer this treatment or not? There was like about a 90% or a higher rate of when it said 90% there. There was only about 40 to 50%, excuse me, of doctors who said yes when it was a 10% failure rate. Again, this is the exact same when you look at the numbers, but because we focus in on the failure versus focusing in on the success. And so that for me has always been a really interesting facet. So as a leader, how are you framing your conversations with your employees, with your customers, thinking about, are you using a frame that is positive or negative? And not saying that you don't always want to use, or that you don't want to use the negative. You can use the negative in some instances to really powerful. We talk about it all the time when we talk about employees and motivating employees around their incentives. It's the frame of, do you want to make a lot of money this year, which seems like a really positive thing, versus don't leave money on the table this year. And again, you're saying relatively the same thing. You're just
But it
saying
feels
it
and lands
differently.
differently.
And when you
So
talk about leaving money on the table, people go to loss, and sometimes loss, that pain of a loss is, as I think we talked about last time, 2 times more painful than the equivalent gain that we get. That's called loss aversion. And so again,
do you think a lot of us as leaders, part of where we start with this is that we just aren't even being very cautious or thoughtful or paying attention to how we're framing it at all? We're just
exactly.
kind of sharing what's on our mind. We're kind of just going off the clip, versus great leaders consider yes, I'm the sender, but I'm also considering the receiver, where their mind is at, how they're feeling, who I am talking to. I've learned from managing this person over time how they feel about it. And then I'm paying attention as a leader. I want to be a better communicator and leader. So I'm going to consider how I do set this up, how I do frame this. That's part of what even this is about. Yeah.
It's about purposely communicating, right? So thinking about how I'm talking, how I'm writing my email, how I'm talking to the team at our team, stand-up team meeting every week. We often go into those just winging it. And that's not necessarily bad, but if we can be more more intentional in how we are structuring the words that we're using, and I'll talk about concrete versus abstract words in a minute here, because that's another key piece of this. If we can be more intentional about that, we are going to be more successful. And even if it's just a 2-minute contemplation before getting into that team meeting, before having that one-on-one with my employee, before writing that email, just saying, how am I going to present this information? Understanding that there's noise, that we are constantly in a moving, so we need to, people don't read. So this is another really interesting thing. We had Todd Rogers, excuse me, on our show, and he wrote How to Write for Busy Readers. And the idea is that we're all busy people today. And one of the things that he talked about is research that he showed that when people actually read an email, doesn't matter, what the email is, if it's from the boss, if it's from a coworker, if it's from a friend, we scan that email first. So we do the skimming kind of piece. And then we read deeper. And most reading is done that way these days. And so if you don't capture them when they're skimming it with the key information, many people don't read deeper. And so again, it's thinking about how you're structuring the communication that you're doing for those types of situations.
I think I have an example of this, Kurt, from yesterday.
Okay.
I wonder if Bailey's going to be listening to this because Cassie's producing it in the behind the scenes there. But Bailey had all of last week off on vacation. Boy, it's so nice. Just generous Remodelers on the Rise leadership over here. She took a full week off. I guess technically it was already Labor Day, so that was a company holiday. But she came back on Monday, and I was already thinking, trying to put myself in her shoes of going, all right, her inbox is going to be busy. We have an in-person peer group next week. We have another one the following week. We have another one the following week. We have food to organize and logistical details, and some of our members who haven't quite gotten their, report to peer completed. So there's a lot going on there. And I've worked with Bailey for over 6 years. So as a leader, I should be able to get a pretty good read on her pretty quick. And she came on Monday pretty organized and not freaking out. There's a lot of work when we work through it. Yesterday, I was noticing a little bit more of I think it's just a little stress of all right, there's a lot to do. Yeah. And I recognized that and talked to her about it. But we set up a meeting this morning. I said, hey, my 9 o'clock hour is open. Go ahead and invite me to this meeting. We're going to title the meeting Peer Group Bailey Peace Meeting. That's what came out of my mouth when I said it. Peer Group Bailey Peace Meeting. And she said, what? I said that we're having this meeting to give you peace of mind about the peer groups. And I want to call it that. And she responded, ooh, I like that. And I think that's an example of a couple of things, I think, of a little bit of thoughtfulness. Be thoughtful as a leader, recognize their stress, recognize their workload, but just changing the title of that changed the way she looked at that meeting versus Kyle wants to quiz me on all the things. And if I'm doing them and if I'm behind, no, I want to have a meeting to give you peace of mind. That's framing.
It's exactly framing. And what you've also done, another step is that you've done this thing that we call empathy, right? That people we often talk about, but very rarely do. And put yourself in Bailey's, shoes to that point and saying, what's going on with her? And so you've identified all the noise, all those monkeys clasping their cymbals
like that one,
in Bailey's brain, right? Yeah. And so by doing that and going, no, this isn't about to quiz you. It's not about to reprimand you. Like you don't have enough things done. It's like, what can we do to give you peace, to give you and put yourself in their shoes and say, hey, here we are. And so by just being intentional about that, Kyle, you've achieved a lot of really great communication.
I don't even know why. I don't even know why I'm listening to this podcast because I already know all this stuff.
You got it. We ought to have you just talk about what you need to do. Here you go.
No. So we've got that. You mentioned, you see, sometimes we use, we frame it in a negative way when we need to, but I do think a lot about the difference, even just in my own work of you could look at it and go, oh, I've got a busy day, just wall to wall meetings. Yep. And I could frame my day that way. I could also frame my day going, I got a lot of people to serve today. I've got a lot of people that I'm going to help today. It's going to be a busy day, but let's get to work here. That framing, that messes with our head in a good way, yeah.
So this is self-talk, right? And there's a lot of work on stress and stress management and how we look at things, which is exactly what you're talking about. One of my favorite, and again, I'll bring in the research on this. One of my favorite little studies is they did a component. People often get anxious before they do public speaking, right? You get up and you do public speaking, and oftentimes we have bodily responses to that stress that we're doing, where our hands get a little clammy, right? We're feeling
Yep.
that our heart rate is a little up. We're feeling the blood pressure being there. Our breathing gets shallower, various different things. And so people then go, oh, I'm really nervous. And the stress increases because of that. Well, if you actually reframe that and look at that, those are the same things that happen to our body when we're excited. When I'm getting in to go into the game, and I get my palms get a little clammy, right? My
Getting
heart
ready
rate
to
gets a
tee
little
off on
shallower.
that beautiful golf course that I've dreamed of
Exactly.
playing.
You think about that. So by just reframing it, instead of stress as excitement in our brains, the stress level, actually, we get, there's a neurotransmitter called cortisol that gets released when we're under stress. They measured that goes down by just the reframing of that,
Wow.
even though it's the exact same bodily response, but we're not
Okay.
having some of the negative aspects of it in positive. So
Good.
exactly, self-talk is a part of communication as well.
I like that. So that's on the framing side of things. You mentioned concrete versus abstract. Talk to us about how that fits in with this.
So there's some really good work. Jonah Berger wrote a book, and I'm forgetting what the name of it is, but basically he's talking about how we communicate. And one of the things that he talks about in there brings in research on concrete words, those words
Is it
that
called
are
magic words?
concrete. So
Well,
think about
he's a
you guys.
best-selling author of Magic Words, Contagious.
There you go, magic
Okay.
words.
Magic Words.
That
Okay.
was the book that he's talking
Jonah
about.
Berger.
There you go. Wonderful of the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have concrete words. Concrete words are those very specific words or phrases that really get very specific. Abstract words are more vague, right? So again, we can think about concrete words as those words that are going to really describe our feelings or how we're doing things, or a variety of other factors, whereas abstract words are more vague. They're often allowed for bigger interpretation. And we want to use concrete words when we're trying to get people to do something, right? We want to use or to really understand things. So instead of using like, hey, we're in a let's get some fruit, right? Fruit. Okay, there's lots of different like what is that fruit? Or you can talk about, oh, we want to get an apple, or I want that really crisp honey crisp apple that is just juicy and savory, right? The way that our brain processes that is very different. And so when we're communicating with people, particularly if we're trying to get people to do a behavior, the more concrete we are, the better off we are. This also, we talked about self-talk earlier, right? If we're labeling how we're feeling, we often do a very vague, I'm stressed, I'm different things. Well, no, I'm feeling nervous or excited about this upcoming situation because of X. The more that we can concretely describe that, actually that reduces our kind of remuneration of the words that were going in our head, and it reduces that stress level and does a lot of really good things on that. But what they've shown with concrete is that, hey, you want to present your ideas, and it's easier for people to understand. They remember that much more, and they're feeling much more like they're being heard, even though we're talking to them when we use
and
concrete
correcting
words.
something that they're doing.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
And then on the abstract, you use abstract when you want people to think an idea has potential. So we talked about inspiration earlier, right? We talked about, so you use vague, kind of like the things that we could do, the possibilities, when you want people to be thinking about the future and about the different ideas. That's when you use more abstract words. And there's actually a set of words that are called achievement words that Gary Latham, who is the father of goal setting, did all this great work on goals in the late 60s, early 70s, and him and another Gary Latham and Locke. What was Locke's first name? I can't remember.
Good old Mr. Locke.
Edward Locke. Edward Locke. They did
Okay.
all this work on goals. But Gary then subsequently did some other research. And he talks about achievement words. And this really great piece where he took a president of a company, smaller, couple hundred people. They basically did call center work. And so all of these people out on the floor answering these calls every day. And he asked, the president sent out a Monday morning memo, basically an email that went out to everybody. And he said, hey, can we just add 12 words? And what he did is he did this randomized experiment where he added in 12 achievement words to one of the memos that got sent out to half of the population, half of the employees. The other half got the regular kind of everyday normal. It was still rah, but these achievement words were things like prevail, accomplish, compete. Those were the words that he, strive, triumph, added in those achievement words. What they found is that they were able to measure the performance of the people who got the memo with the achievement words in it versus those who didn't. And even after a week, there was a significant increase in performance, 15% higher kind of answering the calls, getting people, satisfied, different, so they could measure the performance that people had. And then there was efficiency, the number of times that people had to go and bring that, like get their manager on the call, right? 35% decrease in the 9 times just because they used achievement words. And again, you go, well, how does
because it messes with confidence, it messes with my enthusiasm, positivity.
There's this aspect that we call priming in psychology, which is like if you set your mind up to be focused in on the right things, then you are more likely to notice those, to be motivated by that. And Gary talks about this as an unconscious priming of your goals. So when you talk about use those achievement words, you're tapping into all of our goals that we typically have for ourselves, right? Nobody wants to be the poor performer. What we want to have success. We want to win. We want to attain all these different pieces. And so by putting those words into this, it actually taps into that. And what's interesting is that lasted not just like immediately on Monday or Tuesday when they might have read the memo. It lasted Wednesday, Thursday,
interesting,
throughout the week. So
behavior is shifting. The concrete, I think when we're communicating with folks and we're trying to get them to change, I think it's very unkind to talk in generalities to them of like, I need you to work faster. I need you to think through this better. It's very difficult and it's difficult to understand. It's not very kind to ask that. So anytime I found, at least when you're trying to change a behavior similar to what you just described or put phrasing around, we need to give them concrete examples. Even when you said fruit, when you were going through that example, I was like, okay, let's see where he's going with it. Okay, we need fruit. And then you said, no, we need an apple. And I thought to myself, oh, there we go. That's perfect. So we need an apple. And then you're like, no. I want a honey crisp. I want it juicy and savory of going, oh, there's an even more concrete way of explaining what I'm looking for. And I think when we're communicating with our lead carpenters in the field, when we're talking to our designer and we're looking for kind of a shift, when we're able to use a really specific concrete example or really specific concrete, here's what to do, they can ask questions around that. They'll understand it. They'll nod their head, and most likely that behavior can shift towards that. So I think that's very applicable as we lead our team and we're striving to do that better. Concrete versus abstract.
And Kyle, you brought up a really good point. This idea of asking somebody to do something faster or better. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something, but I don't know what is faster. 1 second faster is faster. I need to do 10 minutes. Do I need to achieve this in an hour when it would take me normally 2? What is that? And so the more that you can get that concrete and very specific, the better off we are in being able to achieve that, work to that, because now I know exactly what it is that you're expecting of me, but also to ask questions. Oh, all right, if I need to shave an hour off of this, what are the ways that we're able to do that? And then you start actually looking at methods and our brain starts processing that. And more likely they're going to ask questions about that too.
Folks, we've already been talking about better communication with your team as a leader, talked about framing, self-talk, empathy, concrete versus abstract priming. Whew, we need a break. Listen to this commercial if you would be so kind. Let's talk about one of our sponsors for a second, Contractor Growth Network. Instead of giving you a sales pitch, they asked me to point you to an episode that we did with Peter Rainey in June called Moving Beyond DIY Marketing. Peter explains how his new website works just like a referral. In his words, he said, it mimics the same way a past client would talk to their friend or neighbor about us. And that's what's been bringing in more referral quality leads for his design build firm. So when you're done with this episode, go back into the Remodelers on the Rise archives, hit play on the one titled Moving Beyond DIY Marketing, and hear it straight from Peter himself. All right, we're back. If you listen to the February 2025 episode, and again, you can go back to, if you're liking what Kurt's saying, you're going to love the February 7th employee engagement, the 4 drives that motivate your team. And I remember throughout that, my sister-in-law had just mentioned, hey, I think Thomas, who's my now sophomore in college, would love behavioral psychology. And I had just had that conversation with her. I don't know if you remember that, Kurt. And I was kind of like, hey, teach, tell Thomas about this. You fast forward to a couple weeks ago in August, and we're driving back to college, and he'd been through his first full year. He just did a big student painters thing this past summer. He was doing a lot of sales work, a lot of entrepreneur work. And as we're driving, he goes, I think I want to major in psychology. And I'm trying to be kind of cool and just be like, oh, really? That's interesting. I mean, your mom and I have seen your interest in psychology and how the human mind works, and you love to talk about that. And we know when we mention it, you're like, oh, psychology is just easy. No, it's not. It's only easy because you really enjoy it and you appreciate it. So, Kurt, maybe, I think he did listen to a little bit of that episode. I'm going to give you full credit for whatever you said in there. You're shifting and you're forming another potential psychologist to take a little portion of your workload off as you ride into the sunset in the decades ahead.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, congratulations, because we need people to understand other people today more than ever. So
yeah. He's kind of thinking psychology with kind of a sales minor and something, and to me that makes good sense. Obviously, there's the route of going psychology and just sitting down and helping people from a counseling standpoint, and then I think what I learned the last time, what I'm learning here is there's so much psychology that plays into business success and that plays into leadership, just managing people well. So the more we learn those things, the better. So maybe let's go with 2 more kind of topics, 2 more areas if we could. One of them being, you were talking about filling in uncertainty when we were prepping for the episode. 5P, proper preparation prevents poor performance.
There you go.
So filling in uncertainty. Tell us about that approach.
Yeah. So what's, I think, is a very interesting fact, and most people I think probably realize this, is that when there are blanks in information, when there is uncertainty out there, the human brain has evolved to the point where we don't typically fill that in with, oh, this is going to be great. We fill it in negatively. So again, think about this. We were tribal, for many hundreds of thousands of years. And if you were out on the savannah and you hear something snap behind you or some rustling in the bushes, there's people who maybe go, oh, that's probably my friend Joe, right? And then, all right, 90% of the time it probably was Joe, but 10% it was the saber-toothed tiger, and all right, you're gone, right? But those people who go, oh, it's the saber-toothed tiger, all right, 9 times out of 10 they didn't get, they were ready to stab Joe, but that one time when the saber-toothed tiger comes, they're either ready to run or they survive, and different things. And so we've evolved to have this negative bias that when there's uncertainty, when we don't know what's going on, we're filling it in with the negative. So in business, and I see this all of the time, leaders think that they have filled in the blanks, or most of the blanks, or I don't know, 80% of the blanks. Well, you have to fill those blanks in 100% and even more, because again, as we talked about in that very beginning, there's noise. And so you might have
Mm.
said something, but somebody didn't necessarily get that. And because if you don't fill that in, what do? They start filling in the blanks. And oftentimes we think about this too, is I've said something, but what I've said might have actually increased some of the uncertainty. It's like, oh, we're having a tough month. Okay, you might be just being honest in different things. What does a tough month mean? Again, going to abstract versus concrete. If I'm sitting there as an employee, I might be going, tough month. Oh, this means we're not making the numbers that we need. Oh, that we're going to have layoffs. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. Oh, I'm going to lose my wife because now I'm out of a job and my kids are going to hate me. So we tend to go down that negative spiral. So we have to be very clear in making sure we fill things in.
Because if we leave it open, it's going to get filled in. Another element that I've seen in my business, and Bailey and I have talked about this over the last 8 months. I'd say it's been a little theme where a client will reach out and they'll say, "Hey, do you have 10 minutes? I'd like to talk." Or hey, give me a call back. An
Yeah.
email that we get there, and where my mind always goes as far as filling in the uncertainty is a very negative bias.
Yeah.
Obviously, they want to talk and they hate everything we're doing. They've had total second thoughts about being in a peer group or one-on-one coaching. They think we're absolute idiots and hate our reputation and hate everything. And they want all of their money back for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Literally, we think of worst case scenarios and we fill it in with that. And there's just a policy that we've made of going, when somebody reaches out to us, we do not think worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And we've kind of messed with our brains a little bit on that. And I think what you were going with that is a little bit of, if we leave a lot of uncertainty in things, if we're like, hey, our backlog of work is slowing down a little bit, and we're a little concerned with it. Like, people will run into that of going, do I have a job next week? What's going on? We have to be careful in our communication to make sure that we're not leaving this void where they just fill it in with the negativity.
Exactly.
And also setting a tone for it with amongst your employees.
Exactly. And I think there's some things, obviously, as leaders, sometimes we can't share everything.
Yeah.
It's not possible, nor is it necessarily right. But we have to be, again, intentional about our communications. And sometimes those off-the-cuff comments that we make can lead to some of those components. I love the example that you gave where I get a client who, hey, can we talk? And it's like, where does my mind go? My mind goes, crap, what did we mess up, right? And that's, granted, that could be, but most likely it's not. Most likely it's something else. But I spend an awful lot of my time ruminating over what could be going wrong. And think about that for you, and just double down on that with your employees or other people that you're communicating with. That can often be the case.
Okay, I like that. So we were going to do one other one, but I'm going to ask you a final question on a different topic.
Okay.
He was going to talk about anchoring people, the psychology behind anchoring, but you're going to have to
not the anchor on your boat.
Not the anchor on your boat. But if you bet you if you type in Dr. Kurt Nelson and anchoring, I have a feeling that one of his 500 episodes will have some of that in there. But I wanted to ask you this question instead. What do you think of just a lot of what we're talking about here is the negative versus the positive, the reframing aspect. Obviously, I'm not a big believer in just the power of positive thinking. You just will it to happen and it'll happen. At the same time, I have seen enough evidence that when I approach my day to day with a more positive outlook and a more positive attitude, and I lean towards framing my day in a positive way, when I don't go towards a negative bias, I do find that I am slightly more of a joyful and positive person overall. Now, sometimes we have to fake it till we make it. Sometimes, we don't feel positive, but we want it to be authentic. But I'm just kind of curious, as a man who has made a living studying human behavior and how our minds work, what's your take on this, just the power of positive thinking, and how do you think about that?
So I think you are onto something here. So positive thinking in and of itself you're not going to manifest something just out of thin air, right? But reframing how we look at the world, the expectations that we set, does impact how our brain sees the world. And so there's really great research on gratitude. So and we might have talked about this last time, I don't remember. But this idea of, if we look for gratitude, and there's an idea of writing down what you're grateful for every day. And you do that, and what that does is it starts to train your brain to look for things to be grateful for. And by training your brain going, oh, I'm going to have to write down something to be grateful for today, right? So I need to start paying attention to those things. I tend to see more things to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And by seeing more things to be grateful for, I'm more grateful. And so it's this positive reinforcement loop.
A positive spiral.
Positive spiral, right? The component that you talk about is, there's also really great things on expectations. And again, our brain and our body change based upon the expectations we have. This is a really great research by Aaliyah Crum out at Stanford. Did work with people who are they were given 2 milkshakes. We might have talked about this too. One of my favorite studies of all times. And I'll give you the punchline at the end. It's exactly the same shake, right? But they bring people in, and one day they say, this is a really high fat, really high caloric, shake, various different pieces. The next time they come in, this is the lean shake. This is, this is healthy and all these different things. They measure our bodily responses. This a component called ghrelin, which is ghrelin, Grehlin, I believe it's spelled, and it's basically in our stomach, this release of this ghrelin component that makes us feel satisfied or satiated, not satisfied, satiated, like we're full or we're not full. And it's different based upon if we thought that the shake was high caloric and full of fat and calories, or if it was lean and diet shake. And it's the same shake. So what you just said is this idea of, how do we set ourselves up for success, because our body, our brain respond differently based upon how we're thinking about it. And so that in and of itself is the more, again, to your point, I'm going to not go down that crisis mode when we get a call from somebody, right? That we're not going to do that. I'm going to be thinking positive components of it. Not that that's going to change how the person, what they're saying, like setting up that call for tomorrow, that call is going to go however that call goes, but it's going to change your response during the remainder 24 hours before that call.
Yeah.
And you're going to be a better leader, better responder, to that. So
excellent. All right. So what you told me there is, don't be a negative Nancy and change my personality and my approach. It might be, and for those of you listening, it might be a good idea to not drop into negative mode and to bring that to each and every one of your day. There may be some more joy at the end of that approach.
And I will end one thing on there, Kyle, is emotions are contagious. So they're just like a bacteria. They're contagious. So if you show up and more positive, you're going to end up having more positive people around you.
There we go, folks. Emotions are contagious. Clip that one, Bailey. Or Cassie, that was a good one. So, Kurt, you have an event coming up in Minneapolis. I bet you there's 7 people listening to this that are probably within earshot of that. Do you know the specific date for that coming up?
So we're celebrating, as you mentioned, we have 500 episodes. So
stop
we're celebrating
about
that.
It, Kurt. Jeez.
Yeah, we have 500 episodes. We're celebrating that. We're going to do that October 16th, 5 to 8 p.m. It's at Malcolm Yards for people in Minneapolis. It's a great venue. We're bringing in a speaker from Chicago, and we're going to be having a fantastic event. Free, you sign up, register. You can just look for the Lantern Group or Behavioral Grooves, and we'll do that. And then we're also doing a special series on Behavioral Grooves, hopefully coming out in spring of 2026, with doing a retrospective on Bob Cialdini, who is the father of influence, wrote the really multi-platinum selling book called Influence. And so we've done 6 hours of interviews with Bob, and we're talking to a number of other researchers. And so it's going to be a really great look back on his work and impact over the
Awesome.
course. So if you talked about sales, influence is, marketing, influence.
We gotta wait till spring of 2026 for that.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, bummer.
Sorry.
If people
3 or 4 part series where it's going to be cool. So
if people liked what you had to say, look up Behavioral Grooves. That's the podcast name.
Yeah.
And then the website again is what? The Lantern?
So behavioralgrooves.com for that one.
Yep.
And then lanterngroup.com is my other one. And then behaviorshift.shop. So, 3 different companies. Or
3 people
businesses.
will be emailing and getting something from that.
Yeah.
So I hope to see that. Cool. Kurt, that was wonderful. Appreciate you coming back on and sharing that. Very fresh thoughts, very clear thoughts, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.